Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world at the moment. My name's James Anderson, and obviously we're here to talk about growth mindsets today. I don't want to spend a lot of time sort of introducing myself. I'll tell you some more stories about myself as we go along. But I would like to start by introducing you to this man. This man is Josh Foyer. Now, Josh Foyer was a science journalist, and as a science journalist, he had heard about a competition called the World Memory Championships. And he went to cover the World Memory Championships because these are the sort of people who can memorize the order of hundreds of digits of numbers. They can recognize the names and faces of 50, 60, 70, 80 strangers straight off. And he wanted to find out what these people were like. So he went to the World Memory Championships and interviewed them. And essentially the question he asked, and I'm sure he was more gracious than this, but the question he asked was, what's it been like to be a freak all your life? I mean, you've got a freakish memory. Normal people can't do this sort of thing. Anyway, these people were a bit taken back. They said, what do you mean we're not freaks? We work really hard to compete in this sort of competition. And Josh's response was, well, yeah, of course you work hard, but you must have had freakish memories to start with. I mean, you've always had those freakish memories. You're not like the rest of us. And their response was, no, Josh, we're just like you and me. We're all the same. Anybody could do this. In fact, Josh, you could do this. And Josh's response was, no way, not me. I couldn't do this. I mean, could you? If these champions said to you, you could have a memory like them, could you do it? They challenged Josh. They said to him, try it. You could do this. In the space of 1 year, Josh Foyer went from having a memory like you and me to winning the American Memory Championships and being the first person in the world to break one of their iconic barriers, which was for the speed memorization of a pack of cards. He was the first person to memorize that order of the shuffle pack of cards in under 30 seconds. It's pretty impressive, isn't it? Let me introduce you to somebody else. Maybe you've watched the Netflix series called The Queen's Gambit and seen how the lead character here, one of the American chess champions, learnt to play chess. This guy here, Alexander, I'm not going to pronounce his last name. One of these things he's famous for, a grandmaster, was for playing 26 simultaneous games of blindfolded chess. Blindfolded chess. Now, there are other people who have played more games of blindfolded chess, up to about 60 simultaneous games. But what made these games special is they were all played against skilled players, and he won nearly all of them. I'm going to show you a video now. Now, the video that I'm about to show you is by a guy who calls himself a mathemagician. Not a mathematician, a mathemagician. And all you need to know here is that the people that you're about to see on stage all have calculators in their hands, and they've been asked to do the maths on the calculator. The mathemagician is going to do it in his head. Just take a moment to watch this next video, and then I'll come back and talk about what all these amazing feats have in common.
Let me try to take this one step further. I'm going to try to square some 3-digit numbers this time. I won't even write these down. I'll just call them out as they're called out to me. Anyone I point to call out a 3-digit number, anyone on our panel verify the answer. Just give some indication if it's right. A 3-digit number, sir, yes? 987 squared is 974,169. Yes? Good. Another 3-digit. Another 3-digit number, sir. 457 squared is 205,849. 205849. Yes? Okay, another 3-digit number, sir. 321 is 103,041. 103041. Yes? One more 3-digit number, please. 728 22 is 500. Ooh, that's a harder one. Is that 513,284? Yes. One more three-digit number, please. 162 squared is 26,244. Thank you very much. Let me
Wow. What did you think of those? A person who could memorize the order of a shuffle pack of cards in 30 seconds. A chess player who can play 26 simultaneous games of blindfolded chess. This guy who can multiply square three-digit numbers in his head more quickly than a person can do it on a calculator. When you hear about those talents, those abilities, what's your first reaction? Because if you're anything like me and anything like the vast majority of people I work with, most of us have a reaction of, they're freaks, like they're different, they're not like me. And this, of course, is what Carol Dweck's talking about in her book, Mindset. It's how we view ours and other people's abilities. And basically, she describes two types of mindsets. Now, there's not two types of people in the world, but we're going to come to that in a little while. Someone with a fixed mindset sees the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see, this is what you get. The person standing here today with these talents and abilities, this is pretty much the person that's going to be standing here in 5 years' time, because this is just who I am. And when you see yourself like that, you spend your life looking inwards. You ask yourself, what talents and abilities do I have? And as a result of discovering the answer to that question, what ability, do I have a good memory? Can I play chess? As a result of discovering those answers, you ask yourself, what am I cut out for? Where do I fit in the world? Because there are some things that I'm just not suited to, and there are other things that I'm really very suited to that I'll find easy. On the other hand, someone with a growth mindset sees the world very differently. Someone with a growth mindset sees the world like this. Hey, look at me. What you see is just who I happen to be today. I change, not just a little bit, I change a lot. I change some of my most basic characteristics, my talents, my abilities, my intelligence. It's all up for grabs. The person standing here today, a shadow of the person standing here in 5 years' time. And when you see yourself like that, you don't spend your life looking inwards, asking, who am I and where do I fit in the world? You spend your life looking outwards, saying, who do I want to become? And what do I need to do to become that person? And in that difference, look inside yourself, ask, what abilities do I have? What am I suited to? Or look outwards and say, what do I want to be in my life? And what do I need to do to become that person? Lies the key difference between the fixed and the growth mindset. And that's the idea that Carol Dweck talks about in her book. That's the idea of choice. It's not that people with a fixed mindset make bad choices. It's just that they don't see a choice in the first place. Like Josh Foyer, when he was challenged by those memory experts, when they said, no, you could have a memory like that. He said, I just don't have that sort of memory. I couldn't do that. And the story that Josh unfolds in that book, Moonwalking with Einstein, is his discovery of a growth mindset. He doesn't talk about it that way, but that's what it's about. It's about learning to develop new talents and abilities and seeing yourself as fundamentally changeable. Now, as a result of those two different ways of seeing the world, we get a bunch of symptoms. Now, I use the word symptom very deliberately because the behaviours I'm about to describe are just the natural outflow of a belief. The mindset is just the belief. When you think, this is me, I can't change very much, then these things naturally happen. Let's talk about them. For a fixed mindset, someone with a fixed mindset avoids a challenge. For someone with a fixed mindset, a challenge is just an opportunity to fail. Sure, you might be able to do that hard thing, you might have it in you, but if you can't and you fail, that's pretty much permanent. So everyone will know that's your limit. So it's much better to say, yes, I could do that, but I won't. Or if you try it and fail, to blame somebody else. That's not your fault. I could have done it, but someone else let me down. These people give up easily. And again, why wouldn't you? For these people, things that are hard today are going to be hard tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. So why would you do that? No one wants to constantly struggle at something. So these people, when it gets hard, give up early. Their life becomes about the path of least resistance. When things get challenging, that's a sign that you're not cut out for it, that you're not suited to those sorts of things. So change. Don't waste more time doing that. Change and do what you're more suited to. These people see effort as a bad thing. Effort is a sign of deficit. Effort is what you have to put in to make up for the fact that you're not naturally good at it. These people see others doing things effortlessly, and they look for the things that are effortless for them. We might talk about effort in more detail later on in our second session. These people ignore feedback. And if you're in a leadership role, they're not ignoring feedback because they're not nice people. They just don't see it as helpful. In fact, they're likely to see it as criticism. So any feedback that these people are offered is just a sign of their deficits, an outline of pointing a finger at their faults. So they don't want to hear that, they don't want to listen to it. And these people are threatened by other people's success. Everything somebody else can do just highlights that you can't do that. So they'll cut those people down, they'll find excuses as I could have done that, but I never wanted to, or the world said I couldn't do it because they didn't give me the opportunity, or make those sort of excuses that come up. For these people, they believe that being comes before doing. They have to look inside themselves and say, have I got a really good memory? Before they'll try to enter the memory championships. They look inside themselves and say, am I a businessman? Am I a leader? And they expect to discover that ability before they'll attempt to do the task. And we've fallen victim to this a lot. You know, we've picked up this message all through our careers, all through our lives. Perhaps at some stage in your life, you've been the victim of a personality test. Someone's come along and they said, I've got a test to find out the sort of person you are, what sort of roles you're suited to. You've filled it out and they've said, oh, you're a red LMPT. Fantastic. Red LMPTs are suited to, are cut out for, are made to do these sorts of roles. You'll find these things really easy. Oh, but not those other things. No, you won't. You're not really suited to those. They'll be much more difficult for a person like you. Have you ever had that sort of experience where someone has categorized you, told you that this is the sort of person you are, and then said this isn't the sort of person you are? It started probably when you were very young. Perhaps your parents or your school took you to try music and art and maths and language, which is all good. You should experience all those things. But perhaps the message that came along with it was they took you there to find out which of these things you're good at. Is this resonating with anybody? For these people, learning is about discovering their abilities. They come to workshops like this expecting to find out if they can do what they're being asked to do. And teachers hear this all the time. My background is as a teacher. And I would have students coming up to me all the time. And they'd come up and say, Mr. Anderson, do you think I'll be good at this? Have you ever asked someone that? Do you think I'll be good at it? Because what that person's asking is, can you please look inside me? Tell me I've already got the abilities. And as a result, take away any risk of failure. Obviously, someone with a growth mindset, very, very different set of symptoms. For someone with a growth mindset, they love a challenge. Don't waste my time with easy stuff. Give me hard stuff, thing that's going to stretch me, challenge me, help me grow. For these people, they're more persistent because they understand that things that are hard today are going to be easy tomorrow, and they'll move on to something else. Someone with a fixed mindset says, if this is hard, then this will be really hard, this will be really, really hard, and this will be impossible. Someone with a growth mindset says, this is hard until I make it easy. And this is hard until I make it easy. And it doesn't get harder and harder and harder. It's just hard until you make it easy. And then the next step is hard until you make it easy. It's just the growth that is hard, never harder. These people see effort as a good thing. Praise these people for their effort all day, every day. In fact, if you try to praise these people for their last achievement, for the assignment they've just handed up, or the project they've just completed at work, or whatever it might be, they're likely to turn around to you and say, yeah, I know this is good, but did you see what I had to do to get there? Because they understand that here is temporary, that their best is only their best when you measure by yesterday's standards. By tomorrow's standards, it's going to be their second best. So they're not particularly interested in where they are today. They're more interested in knowing that what they did to get there is going to help get them even further. These people value feedback. They don't see it as criticism, they see it as essential help. When someone offers them feedback, or when they go and request feedback, it's not with a sense of dread and guilt and not wanting it. It's, can you please help? I don't feel judged by this. I need your help to get me further along. And they celebrate the success of other people. Everything other people achieve is just another sign of what can be achieved. And just knowing that you can do that and you can do that, and I don't want to do what you do, but knowing that you started pretty much like I did, and did and did and did to become that, and did and did and did to become that. Well, I want to become this other thing. But if I do something similar to what you did, then I can become who I want to be as well. For someone with a growth mindset, they understand that becoming comes before being. They don't look inside themselves and ask, do I have musical abilities? Am I a leader? Do I have my management potential? They don't have those questions. They understand that they're not meant to have those abilities within them. Rather, they ask, how do I go about becoming that person? If I want to be musical, how do I go about becoming a musical person? If I want to be a leader, how do I go about becoming a leader? If I want to be successful at business, how do I become a successful business person? And for these people, they understand that learning is about creating their abilities. And that difference is worth reflecting on just for a minute. Someone with a fixed mindset doesn't get learning. I'm an educator at heart. I've been a teacher for many years and worked in the corporate space and others for the last 20 or so years. But this idea of learning isn't well understood. There are a lot of people that think learning is about discovering if they can do something. Whereas people with a growth mindset understand that learning is about creating abilities to do something new. People with a growth mindset understand what George Bernard Shaw told us many, many years ago, that life isn't about finding yourself, but life is about creating yourself. But very often in society we hear very different messages. We hear messages about trying to work out who we are, what we're meant to be, what we're suited to, what we're cut out for. And all these messages from parents and schools and businesses, perhaps we've gone into a business and some of us have been identified as high potential employees. And apparently the other ones aren't. All these messages come along to set up an idea in our mind about our belief system, about what we believe about our ability to change our most basic characteristics, our talents, our abilities, our intelligence, who we are. And it's that idea that I'm talking about today. Because while it's easy for me to sit here and talk about this is fixed mindset and this is what they believe and this is what they do as a result. And this is growth mindset and this is what someone with a growth mindset believes and this is what they do as a result. As interesting as that might be, the real issue here is not about what the mindset is. It's about how we change it. And at the end of the day, I'm not really very interested in telling you much about what the growth mindset is or the fixed mindset is. I'm more interested in talking about how we change it. Because at the end of the day, changing mindsets is about changing beliefs. You can acquire a lot of knowledge. I can give you a lot of information. You can read Carol Dweck's book and a whole lot of other books about what it's all about. But at the end of the day, what we want to talk about is how we change those beliefs. Now, there's a lot to talk about in that space, more than we've got time for today. I've got a book, a Mindset Continuum. Now, this one was written for educators, but the work in there is broadly applicable. There's somewhere close to this video or as part of the course that you're doing at the moment, you can have an e-version of this book to read through to give you some deeper insight into what this is all about. But one of the key ideas in that book, and probably one of the biggest things that I want to get across today, is when you look at Carol Dweck's book, and you start reading through the examples, the research, the key people she talks about with fixed and growth mindsets, something will strike you. You're not going to go through the first chapter or two to realise this. Carol Dweck uses many, many examples of high-achieving people with a growth mindset, and many, many examples of high-achieving people with a fixed mindset. And I find that really, really interesting, because you don't need a growth mindset to grow. You can achieve enormous success, and Carol Dweck talks about highly successful people with a fixed mindset. Now, don't get me wrong, a growth mindset helps, but it's not necessary. And this underscores one of the biggest misunderstandings about Carol Dweck's work. And that is the idea, and I'll do this, a growth mindset is not growth. I can't say that any clearer. A growth mindset's not growth. All it is a belief. It's an idea in your head that says growth is possible, but it's not the growth. It says I can grow, but it doesn't tell you how. It's the invitation to grow, but it's not the actual growth. And I suspect that you're all engaged in this course not because you want to understand that you're capable of growth, that you're capable of achieving your goals, that you're capable of looking back on yourself today in another 10 years and go, wow, look how far I've come. You just don't want to know that's possible. You want to know how to achieve that. And that's where, excuse me, that's where some of the stuff on social media, you may have read work around growth mindset and all this sort of stuff on social media, and you will have seen perhaps Carol Dweck's famous TED talk about the power of yet. And I always laugh when I hear people talk about this, because people have grabbed on to the idea of growth mindset and the power of yet, and how you've got to say, don't say you can't, say you can't yet. And all these ideas, I don't know the answer, just say you don't know the answer yet. And I'm not good at this yet. And we can go around the circle here. This doesn't work yet, I can't do this yet. And the social media idea of this is that just by saying not yet, something's meant to change. But the problem with that is in 6 weeks and 6 months and 6 years, when not yet has turned into still not yet. What's happened? Well, 2 things have happened. One, you haven't achieved your growth. And secondly, you've probably come to believe that that growth is not possible. You see, when Carol Dweck talks about the power of yet, everyone runs away with that first phrase. But it's what she says next that's so important. The power of yet is that it gives you a pathway into the future. If you just say I can't, there's a full stop there. But if you say I can't yet, there's a pathway into the future. But what the growth mindset doesn't tell you is how to traverse that path. You see, from a growth mindset perspective, the opposite of I can't isn't I can. The opposite of I can't is I could. But there are actions you need to take to get there. And it turns out not any old actions will do. So in the work we talk about this week and in the follow-up session later on, we're going to talk about this idea of learning agility. And you'll notice down the bottom here, growth mindset's on the bottom, not because it's the least important, but because it's the foundation. It's the understanding that you can change, that you can take action. Without a growth mindset, you sit on the sideline saying, I can't do it. But with a growth mindset, you stand up and say, well, I can't do it at the moment, but maybe I can do it in the future. It gives you that impetus to take some action. But if you don't take the right sort of action, then you're still not going to achieve the growth. And that's where this work from Art Costa and Bennett Kalick, two researchers that you'll become more familiar with, and we have a handout for you. What Art Costa and Bennett Kalick did was to look at high achieving people that were in the business of getting better and better and ask what behaviours got them there. What were their actions? What were the verbs they engaged in? And they documented 16 patterns of behaviour, dispositions, habits of mind that these people skillfully and mindfully engaged in. There's a list for you attached to this video somewhere. And also this work of Anders Ericsson's, because what Anders Ericsson did was again looked at high achieving people, but asked what's the process that you went through and documented that process of deliberate practice. You might have heard the term 10,000 hour rule or the term deliberate practice. That's Anders Ericsson's work. And it turns out that you don't achieve the growth until you've got all three of these elements. The understanding growth is possible, the behaviours you need to achieve that growth, and you take it through the process of stretch and challenge, going beyond your current best. And the thing I love about these three ideas is that they're not good ideas. They're not dreamt up. They're not someone sitting down going, I reckon people should. They're all research based on observations of what successful people actually do. And that's why they're the corner piece for my book, The Agile Learner, which I don't think I have in front of me. Yes, I do there. There's my well-penned version. You can have there's a free download of the first chapter that we'll give you as well. But the point behind all of this is that a growth mindset only works when you do the work. And for that matter, it only works when you do the right sort of work. The memes, the social media imagery that you see floating around Pinterest and places like that, it's full of half-truths. You know, this sort of stuff, believe and you can achieve. Well, yes, kind of, but it's not that easy. It's not just believing that leads to success. It's believe and you'll act. And when you act effectively, you can achieve. So take a moment to pause the video here and stop and reflect on what we've covered so far. The idea of the fixed mindset, the growth mindset, the idea in your head that they're not growth. Have a look at the mindsets, the learning agility diagram, the habits of mind that I've given you, and come back in a few minutes. All right, so you've had a chance now to talk about some of those ideas. Let's dive into them a little bit more deeply. Now, people with a fixed mindset. Look, people with a fixed mindset, particularly in business, will be the ones that protect themselves. They're the ones that will blame others in the organisation for their mistakes to protect their own identity, to make themselves look good rather than become good. They're the ones that will be on the team and will quickly judge that you're cut out for this, you're cut out for this, but I don't know why you're on my team. They're the ones that will be looking for the status and the position rather than the actual achievement and the growth. They're the ones that will be fearful of judgment. So rather than seeking feedback and looking for ways to improve, they'll be the ones sort of stamping their authority and saying this is good, rather than using the outside criteria of what success might actually mean. On the other hand, someone with a growth mindset is always looking to improve. They're welcoming feedback, they're valuing effort. On their team, they might see people with current strengths and weaknesses, but recognise that's not a permanent characteristic of the people on their team, and rather they'll work with those people so their strengths get even stronger and their weaknesses can grow as well. Excuse me. Now, clearly, very big difference between someone in your team in work with a fixed mindset and someone with a growth mindset. So my question is, which one have you got? You got a fixed mindset or a growth mindset? Now, if you're like about nearly everybody, you've probably pretty accurately just said, I haven't got a fixed mindset, I'm not like that at all, which is great and probably true. But to say you've got a growth mindset probably isn't true either. And what we've done is, because Carol Dweck has presented this work as being fixed or growth, you've got one or the other, and social media has grabbed onto it and often put a versus in the middle, fixed versus growth. One wins, one loses. What we've done is we've created what Carol Dweck and her colleague Susan Mackey now describe as a false mindset. And a false mindset is someone who intellectually understands this work. Like, they get it, they understand that a growth mindset is better than a fixed mindset, and we'd want to encourage people to have a growth mindset. But because we haven't done the time and the hard work in deeply reflecting on our own mindset, what we actually do and say might send much more fixed messages. Because the trouble is, you don't get to choose your mindset. You don't get to choose it. You can't just say, well, that fixed one's awful, I have the growth one, thanks. It doesn't work like that. Your mindset is part of what we call your unconscious bias. It's what guides your actions when we're not paying attention. And if I can come back here, and what it does is the fact that when you're asked to share an opinion or give a thought in a group situation, it's the knot in your stomach that makes you go, oh, I could get this wrong. It's the feeling you get when you're about to be judged, or the feeling you have when you've made a mistake. And so your mindset guides your actions and reactions when you're not paying attention. It's the way you sit back when a challenge is given because you don't think you're really suited to it. It's the way you automatically judge the person over there because you don't think they're cut out for it. And so what I want to give you is, many of you will have seen this type of diagram. This is a summary of Carol Dweck's work. And it's a useful summary in understanding what it's about. But it's not useful in understanding what we need to do to change our mindsets. And what I want to introduce you to here is this idea of the mindset continuum. And so you're going to be given a copy of this continuum in just a moment. And I'd like you to spend some time going through it, looking at the various ways that a mindset changes. And try to identify where you are. Try to identify where some of your colleagues are. Start to recognize that you're not fixed and you're not growth, but rather you're somewhere in between. And the reason we're doing this, the reason we're starting to look at mindset as a continuum, is to recognize that it helps us address this false mindset, to recognize that we're not fixed, but we're not growth either, that there's movement that can occur. It helps us recognize that the real world is not made up of people with a fixed mindset or a growth mindset. We're not walking into our workplaces working out that James has got a fixed mindset, but Michael's got a growth mindset. It doesn't work like that. It also helps us recognize that this is a journey. The work we're taking you through now and between now and our next session later in the year is to help us move along this continuum. Because as Carol Dweck points out, a growth mindset is not a declaration. A growth mindset is a journey, and it's a journey along this continuum. And finally, it helps us reset our expectations about change. Your success with this work won't be measured by the number of people with a growth mindset. You won't be looking to say, I've got a growth mindset or I haven't got a growth mindset. Or as I look at the cohort here, how many people have got growth mindsets, how many have got fixed. But rather it will be measured by how far you move along that mindset continuum. So take a moment now to explore the continuum and to spend some time discussing those different elements and where you fall along that continuum. I'll see you again in a few minutes. All right, we're back. Let's talk now about where that idea comes from. Where does that belief in your mind come from and how do we address it? And what do we need to do between now and our next session? I've got a question for you and we're going to break out into groups and have a discussion about this. But my question is this. Who do you consider characteristically successful? Now don't overthink this. I want to know in the chat or in the discussions you're about to have, when we talk about successful people, who springs to mind? Who do you just know is characteristically successful? And what are 3 things about them that make you go, yeah, they're successful? What is it about them? Have a go at that activity and come back and then we'll have a chat about who you talked about. All right. Now, I obviously don't know who you spoke about, but maybe some of these people have similar characteristics. This man here is Don Bradman, and statistically speaking, Don Bradman is the greatest sportsman of all time. Not just the greatest cricket player, but the greatest sportsman. In most sports, number 1 is this good, and number 2 is this good. Number 3, 4, they're actually pretty close together. But in cricket, number 1, 99.94 was his average. Number 2, low 60s, 40s, 30s, New Zealanders. But that gap, now if you know anything about Australia and New Zealanders, you'll know that was a funny joke. Anyway, that gap between 1 and 2 is the biggest gap in any sport. So maybe you spoke about somebody who was a standout in their field, someone who had achieved extraordinary things compared to other people. Or maybe you spoke about someone like this. This is Layne Beachley. Layne Beachley was 6 times consecutive world women's surfing champion, retired for 3 years, went back and won again a 7th championship. So arguably the best female surfer in the world for 10 years in a row. So perhaps you spoke about someone who dominated a field, that was so influential, so overwhelmingly better than others. Or perhaps you spoke about someone like this. This is Nadia Comaneci. Now the interesting part about Nadia is that she was a great gymnast. but she wasn't very good. She wasn't a very good gymnast. She had an enormous impact on the sport, enormous. And the Olympics and the sport of gymnastics will always remember her. But she wasn't actually a very good gymnast. If you tried to compete at Nadia's standard today, you wouldn't make an Olympic team. You wouldn't even make a national team. So interesting point to think about there. I'll just leave that. You might have talked about people like Mozart, and I'm not going to tell his story now. There's some additional resources I'm going to give you to talk about Mozart's story. This guy here, Elon Musk, another guy who's achieved extraordinary things. But interestingly, I actually met one of his teachers. It's a really interesting story. Someone came up to me in a workshop and said, James, I heard you talking about all these people, and I just wanted to let you know that I taught Elon Musk. I was a teacher in South Africa, and he was in my year 10 science classroom. Now, up until that point in my life, I don't think I'd really experienced the emotion of pity quite like that before, because my gut response was, I was glad it wasn't me. Now, I've met some other teachers who said that'd be really exciting. But just for a minute, I want you to think about this, and we're going to answer it in a few minutes. What do you reckon it'd be like if you were in a class with Elon Musk, either as his teacher or as just a student sitting beside him? And I'll tell you what this guy said it was like in just a little while. Perhaps you talked about people like this. This person here is by the name of Treya Pitt. Now, Treya, if I said to you, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you today to our guest speaker. Our guest speaker has a double degree in engineering and mining. She holds a prestigious job in a Western Australian diamond mining company. She is a Miss Earth Australia contestant and an ultra-marathon runner. Would you put your hands together, please? Would you put your hands together for that person? Absolutely. That was before the burns. You see, in one of those ultra-marathons, she got caught in a bushfire. She spent 2 years in hospital, 60-70% of her body burnt. And you can imagine for a lot of people, after that experience, they would say, well, they were the best years of my life. Now I've got to get used to this. And that's not what she did. She continued to grow. She said, sure, life's happened, but I can become an author, I can become a speaker, I can become a trainer, I can become a businesswoman. And she continued to grow despite that huge setback in her life. So maybe you spoke about someone who had that setback in their life, but then continued to grow. Perhaps you spoke about someone like this. You don't know who this person is. This person is my father-in-law. But when you know his backstory, when you know what he's done in his life, he came to Australia as a first generation Italian with very few resources in the family, had to leave home as a 15-year-old to go and earn some money, but he had his mind set on becoming a lawyer. So he had to find an alternative pathway into the law, which he did. He became the local town's lawyer in central Victoria. He went on to become the town's mayor. When this town that he was in didn't have a Catholic school that he wanted to send his children to, he built one. He's been knighted by the Italian consulate here in Australia. And his latest success has been to welcome me into the family. But the point here is that you may well have spoken about people that no one else will know. But when you dug into their story, you found out more and more about them and you said, yeah, it's the challenge, it's the growth. When someone overcomes one challenge in their life, we go, good on you. When people overcome this one and this one and this one and this one, we go, yeah, that makes you really successful. I've asked that question thousands and thousands of times in my work. And the consistency with which people understand what success looks like is extraordinary. We get it. It's not about the money. It's not about the fame. It's not about being the best, but sometimes it is. But it's not because you're number one. It's because you did these things to become number one. It's not where you get up to in life. If you get up to here, from here, people go, big deal. But if you get to here, from here, people go, wow, that's amazing. And see, this is the point. I don't care. I don't care. I don't care about the people you just talked about. This work that we're doing today is not about those people. This work is about the question, why not you? Why is it when we talk about successful people, do we nearly always talk about other people? See, we have no trouble recognizing success. We look at them over there and we say that they're successful, that's great. But we tend to do it like this. We tend to say, that's great for you, but I'm not like you. And as soon as we do that, as soon as we attribute their success to who they are and tell ourselves, I'm not like you, we create what is called the greatness gap. And it's in that greatness gap that we excuse ourselves not just of the responsibility, but of the mere possibility of ever achieving what they've done. And it's in that greatness gap that is at the heart of the fixed mindset. And so what we have to understand, as Carol Dweck said, is that very often we like to think of our champions and idols as superheroes who were born different from us. We don't like to think of them as relatively ordinary people who have made themselves, who have become extraordinary. Why not? I'll tell you why not. When you're looking at those people, you can do it in one of two broad ways. You can either say, well, that is great for you, and I'm not like you. Or you can say, that's great for you, and I'm just like you. In which case, I'm currently underperforming. Which way do most people like to look at the world? You can never expect that of me because I'm not like you, or I'm currently underperforming. Most people, to one degree or another, create that greatness gap. But this is the thing. For someone with a growth mindset, they don't see the gap. For someone with a growth mindset, they see a journey. They say, yeah, look, it's great for you. I am just like you. And if I did what you have done, I could become like you. And so the one overarching idea that I want to give you today to think about between now and our next session, the one growth mindset strategy that is going to tie all the work we do together is this idea of backstories. Whenever we see this greatness gap, whenever we hear people say, they're just like that, they're naturally good at those things, I couldn't be like them, what we need to look for is the backstory that connects where you are now, or where they were when the same sort of thing, to where they are now. Some of you might know, if you've ever followed cricket, Don Bradman's backstory involved years sitting in a tin shed, corrugated iron, cricket stump, golf ball, hitting it like this. If you do that for a few years, particularly when no one else is doing that sort of practice, hitting a big red ball with a bat that wide suddenly isn't so hard. Lane Beachley grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney, where there's a rich surfing scene. Her school teachers would joke that if the surf was up, Lane wasn't at school. So she got a lot of practice in. But importantly, once she became a dominant surfer in the northern beaches of Sydney surf scene, she wasn't content. She could have sat there and stayed at the same standard and, competed and win many competitions. But she didn't want to be the best female surfer. She wanted to be the best surfer she could be. So she sought out challenges. She went and surfed against the men. Now, she didn't win initially against the men, but it pushed her, it challenged her to get better and better and better. And as a result, she put this huge gap between her and the next best woman in the world. So she dominated for 10 years. Not content with being the best, she wanted to be the best she could be. There's a big difference. Nadia Comaneci, as I said before, great gymnast, but not a very good one. Huge impact on the sport, but not a very good standard. So where were all the gymnasts that could compete better than her back then? Back in the 1970s, where were all the gymnasts, what's her name? The woman who's dominating female gymnastics today is called Simone Biles. You would come back to me. Where were people at her standard? Well, of course, it wasn't part of who you were. Nadia was the best at the time, but once someone's learnt to get to there, someone else learnt to get to here, and to here, and to here, and to here. The talent wasn't something in her. Talent is something you develop from doing the practice that you do. This story, the one of Elon Musk. I asked the teacher, what was it like to have, listen to my words, a kid like that? What was it like to have a kid like that in your classroom? And this guy said, James, I had no idea who he was. He's just another kid in the class. He wasn't getting the straight A's. He wasn't on the honour boards. He was just there. Someone had to remind me he was in my class. You see, when you look around the group you're in at the moment, there'll be some people that are at the top of the pile and some people at the bottom of the pile. And our natural inclination is to say, well, those ones at the top, they'll be the ones that really succeed, and these ones, well, they'll be the ones that struggle. And the truth is, you can't tell. Where you are today is no bearing, no indicator, no reflection on where you can be in the future. Because it's not up to who you are, it's up to what you do. Treya Pitt understands it to the point where on her website, she now says this. You read through all her achievements, but then she says, don't fall into the trap of thinking I've been able to do all of this because I'm just like that. I'm not naturally motivated. I've got the exact same self-doubts. I've got the same excuses, the same insecurities, the same challenges. It's just that I've picked up some really bloody powerful and totally learnable strategies along the way. Treya and other people who make it to that side of the room understand that it's not about who they are, it's about what they've done to get there. And in fact, when you start telling those people that you're just lucky, you're naturally gifted, those sorts of things, they actually get really pissed off because they know that it's their story that got them there. And I'll finish on this note. This guy here is Picasso. And there's a story that goes with Picasso that goes along these lines. Picasso was sitting in a park bench in New York City, quietly in Central Park, sketching to himself. And a lady recognised him from across the way and decided to approach him. A bit audacious, but that's what she did. And said, Picasso, I love your work. I'm so thrilled to see you. I recognised you there and I thought I'd come and ask, have you got a few moments? Could you please just do a little sketch for me? I would treasure it, really. It would be so wonderful. And so Picasso goes, oh, yeah, sure, fine. New page. 2 minutes later, pulls out this sketch and hands it to the lady. Now you can imagine that she was just thrilled. She was, oh, thank you so much. I'll treasure this forever. And Picasso's turned around and said, that'll be $50,000. Thanks very much. Now, the woman's a bit taken back. She said, $50,000. How can you possibly charge $50,000 for 2 minutes work? That's outrageous. And Picasso's calmly said, I'm sorry, miss. I'm sorry, I think you've misunderstood me. You see, that sketch didn't take me 2 minutes. That sketch took me a lifetime. And it's that idea that all the value is in the backstory that I want to leave you with. As you go away from here today and between now and the next session we have, I want you to be looking for where you hear, where you see, where you recognise in structures and policies, in the way people talk, this greatness gap. And I want you to try and fill it. I want you to look for what was not the history. I'm not talking about backstories as history, but where do you see the slow steps of incremental growth that have led to the person becoming the person they are today? Because this person here, this person is standing on the top of Mount Everest, and he would be the first person in the world to tell you that that is not the achievement. He doesn't call himself a mountain stander on top of her. He calls himself a mountain climber. And recognizing that the value is in the climb, the value is in the backstory, the value is in the becoming, and what we do to become, not who we are at the moment, is an absolutely central part to developing a growth mindset. The sort of messages we need to understand. Jessica Sadich is a newscaster in the United States. I worked half my life to be an overnight success, because if you look really closely, according to Steve Jobs, most overnight successes take a long time. That the overnight part of the overnight success is just the sudden recognition of all those years of hard work. Remember, someone with a fixed mindset looks inside themselves and asks, who am I? What abilities do I have? Have I got it in me to be the person that I want to be? The person with a growth mindset says, I haven't got it in me. I've got to do something to become the person I want to become. Between now and the next session, listen for the excuses. Listen for the gaps. Listen for the, they're just like that, I'm not like them. Listen to it in yourself and in other people. And when we come back in the next session, we're going to talk about what we do to close that greatness gap. Good luck with your work.